Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Sheffield, England. Once a mighty industrial powerhouse of England, now a rising star in the UK arts and culture scene. Famous for its stainless steel cutlery, Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday, its football clubs. The hollowed out husk of its once mighty factories and foundries now contain galleries, theatres and museums. But how did this famous city bore Arthur Hutchinson, a serial killer who went on the run and raped and murdered? Daniel Bartlam, who, inspired by Coronation Street storyline, killed his mother, and Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin, who were jailed for murdering their 14 and 13-year-old sons.
Of the latest mass shooting in America.
This is humanity, if we can call it that, at its worst.
650 murders last year.
Wife, mother, serial killer.
So far, they've unearthed 3 sets of remains.
From the creators of A Brief History podcast, a Need Media production, comes a new weekly true crime podcast. Hometown Murders dives deep into the murky underbelly of your hometown. Subscribe now to Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen to your podcast. Arthur Hutchinson, one of the most notorious and brutal killers in British criminal history. He's now 76 years old and has spent the past 32 years of his life in jail for the horrific murders of 3 members of a wealthy Sheffield family. Solicitor Basil Latner, his wife Avril and their son Richard, who all were killed at the hands of Hutchinson. He also brutally raped their youngest daughter, 18-year-old Nicola. Hutchinson had been sentenced to the slaughter of the family, which should have been the happiest day of their lives, as this was a wedding reception for the daughter. Hutchinson, known as the Fox, was born in Hartlepool in 1941. He was raised on the outskirts of Hartlepool, Spalding, Alton Manor Estate. He came from a family of 6 children and at a young age developed a taste for extreme violence. At the age of just 7, he mysteriously stabbed one of his sisters with a pair of scissors. This was followed by several incidents of bullying and assaults on young children, and by the age of 11, Hutchinson was facing his first appearance before a juvenile court on the charge of indecent assault. A pattern of petty crime followed, and a further 19 appearances before court, including 4 times for having sex with underage children. At 18, Hutchinson married a neighbour, Margaret Dover, who was pregnant with his child. He was a serial adulterer and would brag about contests with women, which he seemingly was able to attract. He was violent and suffered mood swings, and any slight provocation could turn into a raging monster. The marriage lasted for 3 years, at which the couple separated. Hutchinson served 5 more years in prison for firearm offences, while attempted to shoot dead his half-brother Dino Reardon. By 1983, Hutchinson was, however, never able to face trial for these crimes. On 23rd of September 1983, he was at Selby Magistrates Court in North Yorkshire to appear in front of a magistrate in connection with offences he was charged with. It was then that Hutchinson put into action a plan he had been formulated. Whilst he was asked to go to the toilet, he was released from handcuffs Instead of going, he sprinted upstairs and entered court number 1, where it was closed for redecorating. As he passed the startled decorator, he climbed onto the press bench and dived headfirst through a window. He suffered severe cuts to his knee and landed on a barbed wire fence below. He was able to work his way free and managed to escape and lose himself in the crowds in Selby. A month later, he was seen in the affluent village of Dore in South Yorkshire, nearly 50 miles from Selby. Arriving late, October 22nd, 1983, he arrived at the home of wealthy solicitor Basil Latimer, 59, and his doctor wife Avril, 55, after they were winding down after a busy but very happy day. A large marquee had been erected in the garden where 250 guests had helped to celebrate the Latimer's eldest daughter Suzanne's wedding to Glaswegian optician Ivor Wolfe just hours earlier. Along with their son Richard and younger daughter Nicola, Basil and Avril had made a start of cleaning up after the celebrations, were preparing to settle down for a night after the busy wedding. Just before midnight, Latimer's had another more unwelcome guest, Arthur Hutchinson. The reason Hutchinson attacked the wedding guests is unclear. He was unshaven, filthy, and still being troubled by the severe wound he'd received whilst escaping. He entered the house through a faulty patio door, possible with the intention to commit an armed robbery. The slaughter began with Richard Latimer. The 28-year-old who had harboured dreams of becoming a doctor had been attacked in an upstairs bedroom. He was stabbed repeatedly in the neck and chest and left half dead on his bed. Hearing the commotion, Basil Latimer came up to investigate and was attacked at the top of the stairs. He was stabbed 3 times and his body slumped down the stairs. A more frenzied attack was directed at Avril Latimer. She was stabbed 26 times in her dead downstairs bedroom. Hutchinson then returned upstairs and turned his attentions to younger daughter Nicola. He severely raped and traumatised the girl at Knifepool before walking her downstairs to where the marquee still stood. Two workmen had come to the house to dismantle the wedding marquee, discovered the scene of carnage early the next morning. An investigation into the murder was quickly launched, with Detective Chief Inspector Mick Burdis leading the hunt for the killer. Crucial evidence had come from Nicola, the only eyewitness. Nicola was in a state of near total psychological collapse. However, 3 days later, Nicola was able to provide information and a description to a police sketch artist. The picture the sketch artist was able to produce shows a thin, featured man with curly hair and a slightly bent, protruding nose. The police also had a wealth of forensic evidence left at the scene. The manhunt at the time was the biggest that Britain had ever seen since the hunt for Peter Sutcliffe. Hutchinson crossed the county border and was on the run. He calmly hailed a taxi after leaving the Latimer house from a nearby workshop, and rather than go to ground, Hutchinson moved around in disguise, staying in guest houses and pubs throughout the north. He was believed to travel cross-country from place to place, including Barnsley, Nottingham, Manchester, York and Scarborough. When he was unable to find a place to stay, he stayed and slept rough in dens and shelters. He foraged food from people's allotments and even ate dandelions to survive. Overnight, Hutchinson had become Britain's most wanted man. He styled himself the Fox and wrote a mocking letter to the press that even stated, quote, "I, the Fox," end quote. In the letter he goaded the police hunting him, denied the door crimes and warned the media to stop reporting on a nationwide hunt for him. Hutchinson was not satisfied with just writing letters. He then rang the offices of the Yorkshire Post newspaper and spoke to a journalist there. In the conversation, Hutchinson boasted of his survival expertise and attempted to portray himself as some sort of criminal mastermind. He claimed to be in and out of the search areas on numerous occasions, and he had avoided detection by being a master of disguise. He also claimed that he was too smart to be caught and he would never willingly give himself up. Eventually, Hutchinson was spotted at 3:45 that day in a turnip field near Middle Stowford Farm between the A19 and Dalton Piercy back road. Hutchinson was now cornered but made a final break for freedom before being brought down by a police dog. He was quickly overpowered and disarmed of the large Bowie knife he threatened police with. Not before Hutchinson had managed to stab himself with it, only superficially. Under a massive police guard, he was taken to hospital for treatment, and the wound he received from the knee when he escaped from over a month before. Hutchinson denied killing 3 members of the Latimer family and repeatedly raping their 18-year-old daughter. He was charged on all accounts, and based on the overwhelming evidence suggesting his guilt, and remanded in custody until his trial for these crimes in Durham Crows Court in September 1984. His murder trial is notable as it was the first time in a murder trial in the UK that the police had a video of the crime scene which was shown to the jury. The 7-minute video shook the jury as it gave first-hand visual recreation of the slaughter that happened at the Latimer house. On the 14th of September 1984, Hutchinson was found guilty of all 3 murders of the Latimer family and repeated rapes of 18-year-old Nicola Latimer. He showed no emotion at the trial judge. He was sentenced to multiple life sentences with a minimum tariff of 18 years to serve. In April 2011, Daniel Bartlam went into his mother's room where she lay sleeping and attacked her repeatedly with a hammer. He then set her body alight in order to conceal his crime. He fled the burning house with his younger brother and dog and waited for the emergency services. He was questioned by the police and he told them that there had been an intruder who had attacked his mother and set the house alight. After his initial statement, Bartlam had told police that he'd killed his mother after an argument. Whilst the police searched the house, they found a hammer used in the attack in Daniel's bedroom. They also found documents on his computer where he'd written a story featuring a character bearing his own name who had murdered his mother. Bartlam had been raised by his mother in a stable home and was by all accounts a normal young boy. A popular soap opera, Coronation Street, had recently shown a storyline where one of the male characters, John Stape, killed a woman with a hammer. TV clips of this scene, along with other violent scenes from popular films, were found on Daniel's computer after the attack. This aspect was heavily focused on by the media at the time. In trying to find an explanation for such a brutal attack carried out by the 14-year-old, the scenes of violence on television and in film had been cited as a leading influence on Daniel, leading him to carry out a copy of the crime. He was labelled the Coronation Street Killer with some articles and news within the media. Daniel's behaviour in the months leading up to the murder does suggest he may have been struggling internally. He'd spend a lot of time in his room and exhibited some unusual behaviours, as highlighted by his stepfather. During the trial, it was suggested that Daniel Bartlam had been seeking counselling in the months leading up to the incident. During these sessions, he discussed hearing voices telling him to hurt people and visions he had had of killing people. Many people thought that Daniel Bartlam had been suffering from mental illness of some kind before he carried out such a horrific attack on his mother. Though Daniel at the time was not found to be mentally ill by experts who examined him. When the case came to court in early 2012, Daniel Bartlam pleaded not guilty to the murder. He claimed to have been provoked during the argument with his mother earlier in the evening and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The jury unanimously convicted him of murder on the 9th of February 2012. In April 2012, Daniel was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years in prison. Detective Chief Inspector Kate Maynor, who led the murder inquiry, said after sentencing, quote, "The level of violence, degree of planning and the extent of his lies is not only shocking, but it's also chilling that a boy of 14 could do this. You can only imagine the impact this had on Jacqueline's family, and having spent time with them throughout the investigation and subsequent legal proceeding, I know it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for them to come to terms with this. It has devastated everybody involved. This is only one person knows what has happened, and Daniel had lied consistently throughout, making attempts to besmirch Jacqueline's character. Everyone who knew her said she lived for her children and was a warm, loving mother. Maybe one day Daniel will tell the truth. There are several gaps and that only he can fill." End quote. His family then went on to say, quote, "We find it so hard to explain what we're going through. There are no winners here because not only have we lost Jackie, but we've also lost Daniel too because of what he's done. We know it was the right result at court, but trying to understand how a boy you've loved for 14 years can do something like this is difficult. To find out that Daniel planned to kill his own mother and then hear all the details of it is hard to believe. The most difficult part for us, and something that only Daniel can answer, is why." End quote. Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin jailed for murdering their 14 and 13-year-old sons after a bid to poison them failed. They were half-brother and sister and strangled Tristan and Blake Barrass, aged 13 and 14, in Sheffield. Barrass would regularly tell her children, "I gave you life, I can take it away." Both Barrass and Machin, 39, were both sentenced to a minimum of 35 years in prison at Sheffield Crown Court. They previously admitted to the murder and conspiring to murder all 6 of their children and 5 counts of attempted murder. Barrass strangled Tristan with a dressing gown cord before Machin strangled Blake with his hands. They then put plastic bags over the boy's head, suffocating them. They had been in a secret sexual relationship for years. Fearing they would be found out by the authorities and their children taken into care, they hatched a plot to kill them. Police said the plan was for Machin to discover what had happened and raise the alarm. On the 23rd of May, the evening, Barrass tried to poison the 4 eldest children by collecting tablets prescribed to one of the children for ADHD and forcing to taking them Carmen Maley, QC prosecuting, said, quote, "None of the children wanted to take the tablets, but were forced to do so. The defendants expected the tablets to kill the children overnight," end quote. When the plan failed, Barrass began to search online for other ways to kill his children, including suffocating, strangulation and drowning. She contacted Machin to tell him they were still alive, and the pair then strangled the boys and placed bin bags over their heads to ensure their certain death. They both then ran a bath and repeatedly tried to drown one of the younger children. When this failed too, Barrass took the surviving children, two of whom are under the age of 13 and two under 3, to a bedroom and phoned the police. Barrass had previously approached the local authorities to ask for help with her children. She also messaged a friend to say, quote, "I thought of every possible solution to this mess. I love my kids too much to kill them. I can't put them into care for the same reason," end quote. Brian Cox, QC, mitigating for Barrass, said, quote, "She was profoundly damaged by her childhood. The defendant was desperate to provide and prevent her children being taken into care. She couldn't cope with the prospect of them being removed," end quote. She told the police that she planned to kill the younger children, two of them herself, after the other older 4 had died. Speaking at the sentencing, Edmund Herbert from the Crown Prosecution Service, quote, "This was a appalling crime in which 2 young lives were lost and the family torn apart, leaving a community in shock. 2 of the surviving children witnessed their older siblings being attacked, and the trauma and all the children had experienced, will continue to experience, is unimaginable. It is paramount that now the surviving children are allowed to rebuild their lives in peace," end quote. Matthew Saunders, a friend of the murdered boys, said outside the court, quote, "A piece of all of our hearts died on the 24th of May 2019, which we'll never get back again. Blake and Tristan leave a huge empty void in our lives, and we did not get a chance to say goodbye. We are relieved justice has been served, but it should not have come to this," end quote. Barrass and Machin were both sentenced to minimum life imprisonment of 35 years. If you would like to support the Hometime Murders podcast, please go to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Hometime Murders, where you'll see several different tiers of support from just $1 a month through up to $25, that should give you producing credit, a t-shirt, a mug, exclusive content, ad-free and early episodes. Please look now and support in any way you can. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help